What if the real power in watch collecting isn't ownership but interpretation? That question frames this conversation with my friend Mitch Katz, collector, author, and the voice behind Time on My Hands, a collector's journey in the world of watches. Mitch approaches horology from a different angle, not as a market, not as competition, but as a lived experience, as a joy. In a field often defined by rarity, by prices, and by prestige, Mitch focuses on something quieter. How you enjoy watches, how meaning evolves over time, and how collecting becomes a process of identity shaped by learning, by mistakes, and by reflection. I have known Mitch for a long time, and one sentence that he keeps repeating is, "Buy the watch that gives you joy." Whereas in this episode, we explore the inner life of collecting. Who gets to define what good taste is, for example? How certain watches and certain makers become elevated while others remain overlooked, and how collectors often unintentionally participate in building the canon of horology. We also look at the role of storytelling, because Mitch has started writing horology-centered crime novels. We discuss everything from forums to podcasts to social media, the structures of authority which are shifting, and then we also discuss if these platforms democratize influence or simply create new hierarchies. This conversation sits at the intersection of personal narrative and cultural power, of private passion and public legitimacy. So stay with us, because before watches become history, they are first interpreted. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Watches and Politics. And today we are going to take a different angle, where we're going to speak with a very good collector first, and then author, and somebody who has been into this hobby for such a long time, somebody that I keep learning from, and he keeps teaching me. After so many years into this hobby, Mitch has decided to write a book that documented his journey and his stories. Now, this was a great idea when he had it at that time, and he shared with some of the close people that were close to him. One of them, I was lucky enough to know about his new work. But afterwards, this blew up, because everybody wanted to read those stories, those personal stories. So then I met people on the way that we didn't know before, that said, "Hey, I read Time on My Hands, and I decided to build a website about my collection." And then he started writing novels about watches, or related to watches and watchmaking. Me, I am just happy to call Mitch a friend, to call Mitch somebody from the family, and to have him on my podcast today. Mitch, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be in the podcast today.
Eddie, this is an absolute honor and a total pleasure, and thanks for the nice introduction.
Well, I'm the one that should thank you. Mitch, so we always start with the same question, and I am very curious, because you are not somebody that is into politics a lot. So when you hear watches and politics together, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
You.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Wait. This is a good thing. When we were talking several years back, and you posed the idea that I want to do a podcast involving watches and politics, I just didn't see it. I didn't understand it. I'm not a political scientist. I didn't see the connection.
Mhm.
But now, having watched most of your videos, you've taught me a lot, and I get it. And it's got me thinking, and has given me pause to think about the intersection between politics and watches and art and power in many different ways. We don't have to rehash what many of your guests have eloquently stated, but it occurred to me, why is why in Europe do you find all these huge castles? Why is Versailles? Did the kings of France need a palace that had hundreds of rooms and tens and tens and tens of bedrooms and an art collection that was equal to none? It was all about power. It was the expression of of influence, of power. And much the same way in that time period, timekeeping, the ability to have clocks, watches, or not watches, but timepieces, was part of that statement of power. I am powerful because I not only have time, but I control time. And we can go through the history and go to present time, how controlling time is less of an issue now, but watches still play a role, as you have said in prior videos. But I have a theory that I've been banging around in my head. You have talked about how watches have been part of politics. I'm going to say that politics has actually promoted the development of watches. Right? You've spoken about Harrison and the need for more accurate timekeeping so people didn't die on the oceans. More British sailors died from poor navigation than they did in war. But what's interesting is, because of the needs of the politicians, of the people in power for timekeeping, and the support they gave to the time makers, the watchmakers, they enabled the watchmakers to ply their trade and create new things. I mean, we have benefited from the space program in many different ways. Miniaturization, a lot of the technology we now take for granted is as the result of scientific endeavors geared towards a specific goal. So the fact that the French kings, the French royalty supported Breguet, it enabled him, it gave him the financial power to do other things, to create things that we still admire to this day. And I think it goes on that, the watches, it occurred to me, I don't know if what I'm about to say is true or not, but the Oyster case, Rolex's Oyster case, it's the first waterproof case, right? Was that done solely because they could? Or was there a military reason or a political reason? In the early 20th century, underwater military exercises were occurring. The exploration of the deep necessitated timepieces that were water resistant. So I'm going to put it to you that it's a two-way street that I don't think people really think about, and that the necessity, I mean, many advances have occurred, unfortunately, because of war. And the necessity of governments to control what they needed to control actually expedited watch development and timekeeping developments.
I am Erdogan Shipoli, and I approve this message. If you're planning to run for a political office, Mitch, this is one of those speeches you can make. Thank you very much. This was such a interesting answer, because a lot of people see it from different angles. I see it from a very different angle because this is what I love. I love both politics and watches and combining. But what you said is something that I've been trying to sell it to people, to kind of promote it. And I cannot agree more with what you've said, and we can say the same for chronograph. The reason why that we have chronograph is because they had to measure during the World War II. They had to measure the operations. They had to measure every detail when an attack was happening. So these necessities helped the watchmaker do it. But one of the most important things is this patronage. So when they were empowering makers to do what they could do, such as Breguet and such as many others. And from now, I guess the audience can understand why I was so excited since the beginning to have Mitch on my podcast to do this episode, because of the different angles that Mitch is looking for. And I know of you supporting independent watchmakers, which we are going to speak as well. But I wanted to follow up with your work, which is you kind of frame collecting as a journey rather than just a scoreboard. Or I have to have this, I have to have that, and I have to have this other one. So when did you realize that collecting was not about objects alone, but about identity, narrative, about this journey that you and I both are lucky to enjoy?
My dad was a stamp collector.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, I collected baseball cards. That's easy to wrap your head around because there's a finite number of stamps from any country. There's a finite number of baseball cards. You get a checklist, and it's got him, need him, got him. So the old game, you flipping through somebody else's cards, got him, need him, got him, need him. And you trade or you flip or you do whatever to get them. In watches, initially I got into watches really because I wanted something to memorialize my father after he had passed. And so I got this, my first mechanical watch. And I started thinking about it and started reading about it. And well, that looks interesting. Let me get this. And then slowly but surely, I started to acquire several watches. But somewhere along the way, I started meeting people. And it's really the friends that I started to accumulate led me into the rabbit hole, pushed me into the rabbit hole, however you want to say it. But then enabled step after step. And there's no finite time where I said, I have 3 watches. I am now a collector, or I am now turning my journey into something of more significance to me, because it's all about what's significant to me. And I mean, and so, yeah, it kind of was a life unto itself. We have an art collection. My wife and I have been collecting art for, I think, somewhere, we figure about 45 years, maybe even longer. And so this was kind of an offshoot of that a lot of the art we were accumulating together also come with their stories. And it rapidly became apparent that whether it be a watch or a piece of art, it's the stories that are part of that acquisition that makes it so much more personal and so much more important to me. And at some point it came, okay, that's what it's about. It really is about. And that's how the book came about, is because it became apparent in conversations with my sons that they really didn't have an understanding of what was in my collection. And after I sent them a spreadsheet about the watches, I realized that's not it at all. That's not it at all. This is all about the stories and what they mean to me. I know somebody in a group that I go meet with about once a month. He has a really, really great collection, and he gets them at auction, and that's good for him. It gives him pleasure, it gives him joy. But I look at it and I say, there's no story there for me. That avenue is not for me. And again, we all come at this from different angles. And that's the beauty of this. We come at very different angles. It's not a stamp where how much story is there? It's, of course, it's the hunt. But here, where there's so many, millions of options, it's what's important to me. And what makes it important to me is the story. For buying it at auction, it's great for a lot of people. A lot of people do it. But for me, there is no story there. So, why? That's not where I want to go. It's not my jam.
And that is the thing. Those stories are, what brings people together, what, we enjoy talking to each other. For example, my collection and your collection cannot be more different from each other. I collect vintages, but at least, there are some brands that, we like them together. And you are so much involved with independent watchmakers, but not when it became cool to be involved with independent watchmakers. It was before even that. And whenever we meet, it's easy to say that until 2, 3 a.m., it's very common for us to go on and speak about all those stories, which of course also develops the taste that people have in watches and what they collect. If somebody wants to collect stories, that's a taste. If somebody wants to collect dependents, vintages. But what do you think most people misunderstand then about taste in watches? And uh, do you think that there is somebody that even decides what is a good taste in watches today?
I think there are some people who believe they do, but
Okay.
I am very, very passionately, very strongly of the belief that tastes come from within. And, it's the old saying, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince or princess. Uh, I think the beauty of what we share when we get together and we're up till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, is that, yeah, our interests are different, but not very much. What you have at home is stellar. And it's wonderful because I get to see something I don't see in my house and vice versa. And that's the beauty of this, that there's such an intersection, and our conversations contribute to the joy of collecting. Yeah, the pieces themselves are magnificent. No doubt about it. They're truly pieces of mechanical art. But in my mind, it's the people I have met, the people I have spent time with, the late night discussions, the good natured kidding, the education that we can supply to each other. That to me is as important, if not more important. The problem with this is if you imbue certain pieces of your collection with these memories and these non-physical properties, you can't get rid of them. You can't. People say, I have you sold any watches? I can't. How do you sell a memory? How do you get rid of the memory? Yes, I have the memories, but that watch is part of the memory, and the the watch produces those memories and gives such joy.
That's true. That's true. So what do you think a lot of people misunderstand about taste in watches then?
They are relying on people who may or may not have other agendas, but they are afraid to rely on themselves. Certainly when I started out 25 plus years ago, there was not this huge glut of information, and certainly not this huge number of people who are experts. We did it ourselves in small communities. We were under the radar, but we had to learn. We had to kiss a lot of frogs. We had to go to every watch store you pass just to look, and you develop your own eyes. I think people are afraid to make the wrong decision. I realized when I was thinking about our upcoming conversation today, I have never made a mistake buying a watch. Never. Okay? Because people say, oh, you don't want to make a mistake. I have never made a mistake. I have bought watches that I have since not wanted anymore. But at that moment, it was right for whatever reason it was, because I bought it because it appealed to me. Sometimes you do move on. I realize I have not made any mistakes, because at that moment, for the purity of the decision, it was right at that moment. The things can change for sure, but yes, I have parted ways with some watches. I parted ways with my very first watch, mechanical watch, because my taste changed. It still amazes my wife that I got rid of that watch, but that's okay. I'm okay with it. I really am. But at that time, it was right, and I got joy out of it. Did I make a mistake? No. If I was to do it all over again, might I have gotten something else? Maybe, because I know a lot more now than I did then. I knew nothing then. And, so people are afraid of making the wrong decision. But there is no right. There is no wrong. And I want people to understand that, to trust what gives them joy, not what gives anybody. What if somebody tells you, you're going to get joy from this. If I go to a theater and it's the greatest comedy known to man, and I'm sitting there stone-faced, well, that's my decision.
Well, I can definitely relate to that. And you mentioned about when you started, and the forums, or how you were trying to get information. There was not that much information, whereas today there is a lot of information. So I wanted to ask your opinion about these online communities and the media ecosystems, and how did they change the authority in horology? Did they democratize it, or did they just make new hierarchies and a lot of information? What is your opinion on that?
I could potentially get myself into a world of hurt. What I really think. But I think I've watched a number of people I've known over the course of years present themselves as experts. And some of them actually do a very, very credible job. Very credible. And I've had conversations with some of them, and I really think they do a good job. There are others that I believe, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, they have tried to present themselves as the experts, really more in self-promotion than in fact to help or to promote the the field, horology, or what have you. And so I think you have to be cautious about it. I think, as in anything, there is such a glut of information out there. And it's hard for somebody getting started now to kind of ferret out what really is journalism versus hype, and trying to protect yourself from the hype. It's very hard now. I'm really happy I'm on this side of it, because if I was to dive into it now, I think it's overwhelming. I actually am overwhelmed by the number of new brands. You and I are on several chat groups, and it's like every day there's another brand or another new name in this world that I didn't know existed. And sometimes it's overwhelming. Some of the brands do that as well. There's a brand that it seems like every other week they have another new anniversary piece and whatever. It gets too much. And so what I try to do, because Lord knows my ADD kicks in, and it's like, that's a pretty thing, that's a shiny object, we go back and forth, is try to stay focused on the people I know, the people I trust, the people who have a similar aesthetic as I do witness in our art collecting. There's a lot of art dealers out there, a lot of people who call themselves artists, but we work with only several people because they understand what we're looking for, and we share and eat and similar taste, palette, and concept of what we're looking for. So if you come to my house, you'll see an aesthetic. You may not agree with it. You may not even appreciate it, which is fine. It's absolutely fine. It gives me joy. But you are entitled, anybody's entitled to their own opinion. But that's what I really want. I want people to have their own opinion and not the opinion of some talking head.
Yeah. So you collect a lot of independent watchmakers, and you even knew them before they were all hyped or before they even had their first pieces. But do you think that any of these makers or even categories of watches is undervalued historically because of the right storytellers or storytelling
Oh,
that was not
absolutely.
present there?
Absolutely. As an example, George Daniels, historically an amazing watch collector, a watch maker. He built about 37 watches. That's about it in his career. But every watch was 37, 39, something like that. Every watch was a major advancement in horology. And then he did the coaxial. The first time a new movement was real, a new system was developed in 200 years. And he has remained in the forefront because of Roger Smith, his one apprentice, has carried George's name and has publicized George's name properly. I think it is well deserved. An equally important watchmaker who passed, I think in around 2007 something, Derek Pratt. Derek Pratt actually helped George problem solve some of the problems George had, from what I understand. But most people don't know his name because there was no one like a Roger Smith to carry Derek's name forward. There are people who know about him, people deep in the industry. And now there's a Pratt watch that came out in very limited edition by Luca Soprano. But no one really understands what Derek Pratt does. Then there are others. There's Thomas Prescher. Thomas Prescher is the first person to ever put a triple axis tourbillon in a watch. People don't know that. You can go to the brands. Which is the first watch that had silicium or silicon components? Do you know? It was actually Rolex. But Rolex did not do anything with it. They did it. They said they did it, but they didn't market it. So the first commercial brand or first commercial watch with silicon components was the Freak. And yet it is still undervalued and underappreciated because it has changed the whole landscape of watchmaking, certainly with major brands. Most major brands have watches with silicium components in them. This all started with Rolf Schneider, Julius Nardin, and the Freak. And yet, for various reasons, Julius Nardin underappreciated for the stuff they've done. And I mean, I write about it in the book primarily because they're amazing watches. The trilogy, the astronomical watches that have never been done. It's never been matched. They have in part, but and underappreciated because people don't get it. And it's not been spoken about in those terms. And we can go into modern day watches where there's technology in certain watches that just are not appreciated. And, oh, it's a pretty watch. That's where you stop at. and yet there's so much more to it. Another one who actually is now getting some recognition, although he doesn't want it, is Stephen McDonald. Stephen, who did the MB&F, what is it, the LM1, their perpetual. The guy is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But he buried himself in Belfast because he doesn't want to deal with people. He likes just creating his unique pieces. And another one, Andreas Strehler. Strehler is now coming out with pieces under his own name, but his background, his CV is amazing on the companies that he's worked behind the scenes for. And that was done because that's how he supported himself. Now he has the wherewithal to start producing pretty impressive watches under his own name. But people don't understand that. He's not the flash in the pan. The guys that I am most impressed with are the guys that have been at the bench for decades, not minutes. And you know what? That's fine. That's my thing. And I could go on. The Habrings. I mean, Marco Lang. Those guys, they've done the work and they have some incredible pieces, and people just don't know it.
So, Mitch, we've talked about the makers, the brands, and the rarity of pieces. But what makes a collection historically meaningful beyond the price, the rarity, or the brand name? Because I feel that sometimes a lot of collectors, or maybe the community, is also stuck into the rarity, the prices, the brands. But what do you think makes a collection historically meaningful
Rarity
beyond those?
is not what it's about. Price is not what it's about. Why is Vermeer so important? Because he did things centuries ago that were unmatched. What made Rembrandt so amazing was his manipulation and use of light. That was, prior to him, I'm not an art historian, and maybe I'm out of my comfort zone, but still, his use of light was unmatched. In modern times, why was Picasso so held in such reverence? Because he did things that had not been done. He was there when Cubism came. His um, uh, weird modern depictions of people with their noses coming in different directions. He was the first one to do that. It's being the first that makes it historically significant. Andy Warhol. Who the heck wants a can of tomato soup? The whole pop art movement. It was created. He created it. He was the first. You can find other similar things now by a lot of other artists, but Warhol was the first. So what makes a watch collection or any collection historically significant is the first, or the early adopters, the people who were pushing the edge. Mention the trilogy. That was a first. That, how many watches are in the Guinness Book of World Records? Okay. Not so many, right? I mean, having an early coaxial escapement, having a Daniels. I mean, quite frankly, those are either the first or a something that the man touched or conceived of that makes it more historically significant. Now, again, I've been lucky. I cannot tell you how lucky I have been and how fortunate I have been to meet some of these people and to have access to some pretty unique pieces. And it's my honor and my pleasure to own those pieces. Are they financially a great investment? I have no idea. No idea. I tend to think not, because these are not the cool, the hyped brands, the hyped names. Well, maybe the Daniels, of course, but on the other hand, I am so honored to have these prototypes or these early pieces that set these watchmakers on their course. I have a early resonance, and I got it. I had no idea who F.P. Journe was or is. I got it because I thought it was cool, and I had never seen anything like it. And I came close to selling it a few times. I said, I should get something with a gold movement or something, whatever. I said, no, I have his piece. Why would I want anything? This is the piece. And so it's still in the bank. I mean, it's still with me. I still wear it. And it's because it's an honor and it's a pleasure. And, you never know what history is going to say until you've lived it and you've lived a few years after. So you're back into it. You don't intentionally do it in the most part. Sometimes. When I got the Daniels, I knew that was significant.
And a lot of these things, it's about, as you said, about the people that you know. Like, for example, I didn't have the opportunity to meet Daniels, stay with Roger Smith, but then the stories that you have published, the stories that you have shared with collectors, with me, and with what we've talked, that makes all what this is about. The people that you know, the stories that you hear, and then all those innovations and the small things that we talk about. But there is a time when a collector becomes an author. So what do you think, if a collector is also an author, what responsibility comes with translating, for example, those that private passion into
First of
public
all,
narrative, which you have
I
done?
think one of the gifts of this hobby of ours is and we've mentioned it, is the people. I mean, before I started collecting watches, I didn't have friends.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have friends. Now I have friends all over the world, and it's cool, and I enjoy it. And it's like, I don't care about fame, whatever, but I have friends. I have people I can sit and chat with from wherever. And to me, that's an incredible gift. And that is as important a joy in this passion as the watches themselves. I think it's a little pretentious to speak for anybody else who has written anything, because I'm still having trouble believing and accepting the term author, because I don't feel like I have spent enough time and sweated enough bullets and got enough rejection slips to truly be called an author yet, even though, yeah, there are 2 books out there with my name on it. But that said, I think the responsibility of somebody who's going to sit down and write something on, in this case, about watches, is to be completely transparent and to be completely honest. I think transparency is critical, because with transparency, one can then assure the reader of objectivity. I was talking to my wife about this earlier today, and because I was thinking about just this, and I have never purchased a watch because of anything I've been given, any benefit I have received. In the same vein, I have never not bought a watch because I haven't gotten anything from them, if you get what I mean. For me, I acquire a watch because it means something to me, not because of what the company is doing for me, or the trip they have offered me, or the hat they have given me, or whatever, the dinner they've taken to me. Yeah, I have been. My wife and I have been the recipients of some very nice and very considerate benefits. That is true. I cannot deny it. And I lay it out there. But they have not translated directly into sales. I have bought the pieces because they mean something to me, not because of a trip I was given or whatever. And to me, that's important to get across because I am not a shill. I don't want to speak for a specific company because in the background, I'm getting, they're paying me off. And unfortunately, in this day and age, and this is what I mean about transparency, I don't think that's 100% the case in a lot of these experts.
So we're talking about histories, and we're talking about the narratives, and we're talking about all this storytelling that sometimes it becomes mythology, and even brands, sometimes when I read, I take it with a grain of salt of if that did happen or not really. So do you think the modern era is producing better history or better mythology?
I mean, we make everything in, under our roof. It's like, really? Everything in-house. Oh, right.
Yeah,
I mean,
everything in-house.
20 years ago, I went to a case maker, not using any names, and they were the case maker for a certain brand. And oh, by the way, there was another brand that was having cases. They say, don't take any pictures. I cannot tell you the number of times I have been told something, and then they say, you shouldn't say anything about that. And it goes on till today. I mean, the mythology that brands build up. I mean, even with their the names of brands. I mean, I can go on a whole rant about that, about brands that buy the name and then try to connect themselves back 200, 300 years. But when you read about the brand, even on their website, 1700 this happened, 1780 this happened, 1810 this happened, 1983 this happened. What happened in the middle? I mean, I'm just making up dates, obviously, but the point is there is a lot of mythology, and I think this business, which has been around for 500 years, is ripe for a lot of mythology, and it continues to this day. And again, comes back to transparency. There's a reason in their marketing ideas not to be transparent. It's a very opaque business. Very.
And I just have the feeling of why. Like, why do you have to make, let's say, all the type of, you're going to make a 10-piece run of a simple dial. Why do you have to say or mythologize it that you do it under one roof or in your manufacture, and hide the fact that maybe a very good dial maker who is an expert on that is doing those 10 pieces? Like, I never understood that. Like, it doesn't mean that just because you do it in-house is going to be better, because this is a limited piece. Like, why would you do like 10 dials or like 10 hands, for example? You can say that these 10 hands were made by, why not be more transparent? Well, these are some of the politics that brands and makers, and in my series one where I narrate the watches and politics, I call these the silent heroes, or the people that don't know about I'm talking about the suppliers, because there are so many suppliers that do incredible stuff that we are lucky to know and consider friends, but then all their names are not mentioned, and maybe they should be as famous as makers or brands. But so now I want to switch to something personal, Mitch. If a future historian wrote a chapter titled Mitch Katz and the Inner Life of Collecting, what subtitle would you hope they choose?
He followed his heart and hoped his brain made sense out of it.
Okay, that's a very good subchapter. So, Mitch, we can go on and on to talk about these beautiful stuff. All important topic that connect watches and politics together, of course. But this has been one of the most amazing conversation and the relaxed conversation that I had. I really appreciate you. Now, before I let you go, I want to ask the last question, and that is, what is a collector for you?
I see collectors, or I see people who accumulate, acquire watches, or involved in the watch world in three categories. The first is what I call the flippers. These are people that look at watches as commodities. And the main motivation is money. You've had people on your program that talk about money. To me, it's not my jam. It's not how I look at watches. In fact, it's not any part of my conversation. It is a reality, of course. But these flippers, they're most interesting. And I'm not talking about the people who do day trading, buy it and sell it, buy and sell, buy and sell it. And it could be a long hold, but the bottom line is they're looking at the financial gain. The second group are what I call the enthusiasts. These are the people who know every detail of a watch, how many threads are on a screw, how big the hole is, how big the movement is, how fast the escapement goes, the amplitudes, whatever. They can give you every detail, and they are fascinating people because they have incredible funds of knowledge, but they don't feel the need to accumulate, whether it's a financial reason or a personal choice. They have no interest in the actual physical possession, or not capable, or they don't have the capacity to do it, but they know so much about it. And they're valuable because you can learn a lot. Then there is the collector. And the collector, and a number of your guests have said it, the uniting principle is passion. They have a passion for these objects of art that is sometimes unexplainable and other times very explainable, but it's all based in passion and the desire to possess. I think we have been collectors for time immemorial. I have a son who, for a while, collected denim. My older son collects guitars. My father collected stamps. My wife collects scarves. It could be any object, but it's what gives one joy and you have a passion for it. One thing that has been said by several of your guests is there should be a unifying factor when defining what a collector is. Only chronographs or this brand or certain features of a watch. I don't agree with that at all. I think the unifying factor in my collection, and I think should be in anybody's collection, is me, is the collector themselves. They are the unifying factor because it is their eyes and their passion that drives the need to acquire. And if you trust your eye, there may be a unifying factor, but there may not be. I can one day wear a 46 millimeter watch and the next day wear a 36 millimeter watch. I can have a chronograph or a highly complicated watch one day and a simple time only the next. I can have a highly technical watch one day and a piece of art the next day. The unifying factor is that they all give me joy. And that's all I care about. And to me, that's what I believe a collector should be, is what gives you joy and what, in the end of the day, gives you the happiness. And you look at it and you say, that's it. Same thing with our art collection. I mean, there's a painting that's right on my wall, right over my left shoulder, that I bought within 15 seconds, really, because I saw it and I was so overwhelmed by it. And to this day, I mean, this is 15 years ago. To this day, I cannot tell you why it has such an emotional impact on me, but it did. And it's the same thing goes with so many of these watches. It's like there's an undescribable emotional impact that lands in my soul. And that's what that brings the joy of this collecting. And is only complemented or magnified by the people who I surround myself who share this same joy.
This is amazing. This conversation can go on and on and on, Mitch. And I can definitely see another one coming. So hopefully in a few months we can sit down together, maybe in person, and talk more about particular watches or how your taste has evolved and what to expect next. But I just feel honored that you have been on my show. I've been honored to call you a friend and learn from you.
And it's been an absolute joy. And we're not just friends, we're family.
Same. I share that sentiment with you.